welcome to Film Companion.
Thank you.
So I believe when you actually reached the set in India to shoot for Bhopal, A Prayer for Rain, you had no idea that the character that you're playing is going to have lines in Hindi.
That's true.
What was that like?
It was terrifying. So I'm fluent in Gujarati and English, obviously, but I read the script, loved it. The deal was signed. I flew from LA to Hyderabad, and we went to the first rehearsal, and I started reading, and I'm reading the scene with my scene partner, and the director says, "No, no, Hindi mein." I'm like, "Hindi mein kya?" Well, really? The script's in English. You're kidding, right? And he's like, "No. Well, you're playing a journalist in Bhopal. He doesn't speak English." And I was like, "Okay." This is terrifying because I didn't know that, and we had a month to prepare, and I could have been preparing in Hindi, but so it turned out to be a really welcome challenge. I had the chance to work with a dialect coach, but then also take full advantage of all of my cousins who live in India, calling them at all hours, saying, "Hey, I'm rehearsing this. Am I saying this right?" Luckily, Hindi's close enough to Gujarati that I could learn the Hindi through Gujarati, and hopefully pulled it off. But it was a brief, terrifying couple of days figuring out, am I doing the right thing here? Because the last thing you want is to make it look like you're an American who's doing a terrible job at playing an Indian.
But playing a character is also not about just the language or getting the language right. Motwani is a guy who has lived in India, who works there, who knows the people there. He knows the insides and out of how things work in India. How did you get the physicality, the attitude, just a sense of him? Because he's not somebody who grew up abroad.
Sure, that's a good question. Thank you for asking it. That's what I love most about preparing for characters, right? Is finding out who this guy is, what does he actually do, what makes him tick, how does he behave here in the early '80s in a relatively small city in India. And there are archives you can study. There are, I think Ravi Kumar, our director, had the chance to meet the real guy that the character is based on. And then you just take some creative liberties by figuring all of those things out. Clearly, Motwani's the kind of guy who loves his loud shirts and a little bit of bling, some gold in his rings. But what does that signify for him, right? Yes. And that was a nice journey to be able to discover, is he likes those flashy things. He ultimately is one of the few people in the town whose livelihood isn't dependent on the factory.
Yeah.
So that's what allows him to look a little more critically and blow the whistle when he realizes something might be going wrong. And none of the people in the town at first really believe him, because he's had this history of being kind of a bunky journalist who just likes to sell papers at any cost. And you realize he's really trying to tell this story. So that really was compelling to me in figuring out that layer, when your whole town that you care so deeply about doesn't believe you. It's kind of like The Boy Who Cried Wolf. What does that signify, and how do you go about telling that story?
In this movie, we also worked with Martin Sheen.
Yeah.
And when Martin began in 1959, one of the things that he's had to do was that he had to change his name from Ramon to Martin Sheen, basically because he didn't want to be typecast in ethnic roles. And you had to do that too, reluctantly. Have things not moved at all? Have they not changed at all in terms of typecasting?
I think they have changed a lot, and I will never know if that was the reason that I started getting some more work than before. So the full story...
I read in interviews that you said it went up by 50%.
Here's the full story without the clips. Because it did, but here's what I'm not quite sure about. So this story, sort of like a Harold and Kumar moment, it was like 3 a.m. We were getting hamburgers with college friends. None of my college buddies were film students. They were all studying business and history and things like that. So I kind of casually mentioned that I had read this article about, almost half of actors in the Screen Actors Guild have screen names, and what do you guys think? Should I come up with a screen name, and what would it be? And I'm thinking something kind of catchy and cool sounding. And they go, "Yeah, what about Kal Pacino?" And they just go on and on for 90 minutes about every pun on the first part of my first name. And by the end, it was like 5 a.m. I had just gotten new headshots done. And I was sending them out the next day. So I said, you know what? One of them had said, "What about splitting your first name?" I said, "Let's try it." So I tried it. I'll never know if it was me being more aggressive, if it was the name, if it was the new headshots. But whatever it was around that time, it did seem to make a difference that people thought it was a little more catchy. And that was 20 years ago. I think sometimes that'll be an issue depending on who you talk to. Other times it won't. I've been pleasantly surprised at kind of the nature of that type, typecasting based on how you look, or typecasting even based on the types of movies you've done. had the chance to do a 4-episode arc on 24, largely because Howard Gordon, who I love, was a Harold and Kumar fan. Same thing with Bryan Singer when I worked on Superman. Those guys thought, well, this guy did a really broad comedy. What about flipping that entirely and seeing if they can do a superhero movie or do a drama? And I loved both of those experiences precisely because of that, right? That you've got these smart, incredibly intelligent directors who sit there and go, how can we actually shake up that model of what people are used to seeing and turn that on its head? So I hope to do more things like that.
Coming to the other work that you've done, you've also been on the Obama administration doing work. And when you started working in politics, you changed back to your original name. How did that feel and why did you do that?
Sure. So that's a little more simple of an explanation.
Okay.
Is I never officially legally changed my name. So my name has always been Kal Penn Modi. And when you work for a formal entity, a government entity, anyone that does a background, you use the name on your birth certificate, the name on your ID, so that when you go through your security every day at the White House, it matches what's on your driver's license. So yeah, that's.
I believe the reason you also wanted to, work with Obama was also because of the fact that your parents told you a lot of stories about your grandparents who were socially really active, during the freedom movement and things like that. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah, it wasn't even just my parents, it was actually my grandparents themselves. So the quintessential story of being a kid and being coerced into eating your vegetables, like, have more shock, beta. Like, I don't want more shock. And they're like, well, here, I'll tell you this story. And they're telling you these stories that at the time you just think, okay, my grandmother or grandfather's telling you some story from way back. You realize as you're reading history books, they were talking about being thrown in jail and beaten by the British for standing up for their rights. So that was always a family value of the concept, not of being a Democrat or Republican or any of the political parties, but doing something that you feel strongly about. And so, reading about, at that point, Senator Obama and then having the chance to volunteer for him and work for him, something I, at that point, and still do strongly believe in, and really enjoyed the fact that I could take a sabbatical from acting for a couple of years and work for his administration and then come back, be blessed enough to have fans let me come back into their homes for another TV show or another movie.
Gal, you're an American actor with Indian parents, and you travel to India, you've got family there, and we're a country that makes 800 films and is crazy about cinema and cricket.
Yeah.
Doesn't Bollywood ever attract you? Don't you want to work there? And if yes, have there been offers, from Bollywood that you've entertained or ever thought about?
Sure. I would love to do a Bollywood film. The stuff that I enjoy watching the most are things like a lot of Gudit Monga's films, things like Udan or Lunchbox. I just watched D-Day with Irfan. He was incredible, obviously. Gangs of Wasseypur. A lot of the things are, I guess, now they're not called offbeat anymore, right? They're not even called independent. It's just this emerging narrative. But I also like things like Zindagi Mein Lagi Dobara, and I would love, if I could pull off the dancing and the Hindi, I would love to. I would love to take a stab at something like that.
You've already pulled off the Hindi.
In this movie, I hope so. The dancing, I think, is easier than the Hindi for me, at least.
Thank you so much for talking.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. It was a pleasure. Enjoyed it.
Hi, I'm Priyanka Chopra, and please subscribe to the Film Companion YouTube channel and get your film fix.